Um, we are very grateful that Kibbie has made time in a very, very hectic schedule to. This is the second part of a two-part workshop. Our first workshop we held in August or beginning of September, and we focused on the portfolio itself. Today, Kibbie will focus on the developing your teaching philosophy. She did send some homework yesterday. Sorry, I just see I'm still presenting. Apologies. So um, all the best, Kibi, and I hope you enjoy today's workshop. I see Elizabeth is also here. Elizabeth, would you like to say something?
Hello, everyone. No, I've just dropped by. It's good to see you all, and I'm waiting with interest to see what happens. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. Megan did indicate that this is the second of a two-part workshop. And I think before I forget, and I probably will at the end, one of what you also need to look out for is a masterclass that we're going to have on developing a teaching portfolio by Jenny Clarence Fincham. So this would also help you think about your portfolio in more nuanced ways as well. But look, so the details of that we'll put on the circulars. I'm sharing my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm delighted that so many of you could join us today. So even if you didn't attend the previous workshop, it's absolutely fine. I do actually recap on some of those as we go along, some of those slides as well as we go along. But I really do want to try and make this as workshopy as possible as we can online. Initially, Megan and I thought, okay, we'll actually break you up into breakout rooms so that you can have a bit of a discussion and share. But then we realized that there was, how many, Megan, was it 100 and something people booked to this workshop, to attend this workshop? And you can't have big groups. So we actually thought, okay, let's just do it the best we can. So, okay, so you would have seen this slide of mine before. So it's really, Linson actually argues that anyone setting out to teach has a philosophy of teaching. So you've all got these. And I know that some of you here have already developed teaching philosophies and you're actually working towards your promotion towards associate professor or full professor. So you've already got the starting of a philosophy. But your philosophy also evolves and changes over time. And your philosophy is not something, and I think that one of the things we often hear from our colleagues in the faculties and sometimes the vice deans teaching and learning and the deans, it says they tell us that staff are really worried about writing this philosophy, and it really troubles them, and they see it as this big hurdle that they need to actually climb. And really what I want to say at the outset is that I want to really demystify this a little bit. It's not something that's esoteric. It's not something that's grand. It really is something that we always, writing about our views, the ways in which we think about our students, how do we engage in teaching? What is process do we actually use to teach? And to teach well in our disciplines. And so it's not something that's very complex. It's also, and it's not unpredictable. It's something that you actually already hold, and views and ideas that you already hold to be true. But it really is about taking that step back and really thinking about it and seeing thinking and reflecting on your philosophy and your in relation to how have others responded to these values that I hold to be true? What are others thinking and seeing? Um, and and it's through that process that your philosophy actually develops, and evolves and changes and becomes better. Okay, so really what I want to do in this session is really help you think through by raising questions, by providing some prompts, help you really think about your philosophy. And I sent you a task, so you've started writing um, about your philosophy and responding to some of these prompts. Then I also want to do the other part of the philosophy, which is linking your philosophy to theories on teaching and learning and to context more explicitly. Okay, we do that. Many of us work with theories of teaching and learning in higher education, but we often don't do this explicitly. Now I actually want you to think about that and foreground that in little ways. Then we can talk at the end about a way forward. Okay, you've seen this, and so teaching as narrative, and we work from the premise of teaching as narrative. When we teach, we tell stories. We tell stories about our disciplines, about what role these disciplines play in the faculty, in the higher education academy, in the professions, what role they also play in relation to human knowledge and how knowledge is created. We also tell stories about who we are as knowers, but we also tell stories about who our students are, about how knowledge claims are made. So we kind of do it intuitively in relation to our disciplines. What I'm asking now is that you actually take that step back and really think about your story, your teaching story, in a lot more detail and in more critical ways. Okay, so being a bit more critical. So how is knowledge constructed? What kinds of knowledge claims do we make when we teach? Where do these knowledge claims actually come from? Do we critique these knowledge claims? How do we make these knowledge claims accessible to the students that we have? Okay. So please feel free to stop me whenever you want to ask a question, or if something that's not clear, I'm happy to engage with questions as we go along, and Megan will help me monitor them in the chat as well. Okay, stories are very powerful, as many of you know, in relation to your own disciplines. So the power of a story for researchers and teachers in higher education is that stories actually help you become suspicious of a master narrative, or make your students more aware of critiques of these master narratives. So you really have to take a more critical stance. Tools of knowledge. Okay, so stories encompass tools of knowledge gathering. How do we actually gather knowledge in relation to our particular discipline? How do we share that knowledge? Okay, so what kinds of tools do we use? And also really the idea that there's a very subjective element to this knowledge. So it's moving away from this idea that knowledge is objective, okay, and that we have to privilege objective knowledge. Of course, this is also very, very specific to your discipline, the way in which, or the extent to which you embrace the subjectivity, okay? But there is always a subjective element, and that subjective element must not be subsumed. Okay. Reflexivity is really important, and what we want to see throughout the portfolio and at various stages is some kind of reflexivity. And it's not just about stepping back and thinking about our positions as researchers, but also thinking about how has that position actually changed and evolved. So for example, when you're looking at professional development, it's not just about the list of workshops that you've attended, but also how have the workshops or your engagement at different professional development opportunities, how have these actually helped you reflect on and improve on and critique your practice? Okay, so it's a lot more reflexive than reflective, than just merely thinking about. And that related to the other point is yearning for and working towards change. Okay, so it's also the importance of the process of change and improving as we go along. Okay, so I gave you this task and I said very often your teaching portfolio starts with you. Who am I? And where do where do I come from? Okay, and how does that, think about your own journey to university, to being and becoming a lecturer. What is significant in that journey that you actually want to share as being as informing the way in which you approach your teaching? Okay, and this could be your upbringing, your childhood experiences, previous encounters, learning experiences with other lecturers that you may have that helped you shape your own practice, what beliefs you may have about teaching, but other beliefs about life and society in general, and how have those actually influenced your teaching? So I asked you to do this. Does anybody want to share what they've actually written in relation to this? Any sharing? Anybody want to just check if what they've written? Matthew, thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to share.
Thanks, Matthew. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm getting an echo here. I hope you're not getting that. So let me just grab I'm just going to read it. I'm not going to share my screen, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Just read it, yeah.
So, sorry, I actually wrote more than I thought I would on this. So just stop me if it's too long. This is who I am. I grew up in the Cape. Sorry, just adjusting there. Okay, I grew up in the Cape and I spent much of my younger years exploring the outdoors, particularly fishing in mountain streams and surfing in the ocean. The outdoors engendered in me a curiosity about the natural world and how it came to be the way it is. By the time I reached high school, I was very interested in environmental topics, especially those involving animals. That's when it happened. In grade 10, I got a biology teacher who taught with passion about animals and how they function in nature. He transferred this passion to the class, and I was lucky to have the same teacher through until matric. By the end of those 3 years, I knew I wanted to study animal ecology at university level. So that's a bit about who I am, and then where I come from. Although I guess that paragraph's linked to where I come from. At the University of Cape Town, I studied zoology and ecology as majors and was extremely lucky with the lecturers that taught me there. Although I found first year of undergraduate study very generic, from the second year onwards, the classes were much more smaller and more personalized. Various courses during my second and third years as an undergraduate student stand out in my mind as having shaped my experience and philosophy towards higher education. I particularly enjoyed entomology because we had a lecturer who took us into the field a lot and got us to engage with our study subjects all the time. Our major assignment for this course was to create an insect collection of as many of the major insect orders as possible and to display it professionally in a mounted case. To go out into the field and collect the animals and engage with our study subjects like this was something that really appealed to me. And the most profound effect was being exposed to the incredible diversity of life that was all around us, even in open spaces around the city. So this is an example of a module and a lecture that instilled in me a sense of wonder about life and pushed me further along my path towards wanting to spend my life studying animal diversity and biology, and to one day transfer the sense of wonder to my own students. So that's what I have for that part.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that, Matthew. And I think what stands out for me is that not just the influences, but the clear link between your discipline and the influences. And I think that that's really useful, and that's a nice starting point for your philosophy. So thank you for sharing that. Anybody else want to share maybe just one more, and then we can move on? Sondezi, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. This is Buyi.
Buyi, sorry, Buyi.
Yes, and this is my surname, and I'm used to be called by that by most of my lecturers. Anyway,
I'm sorry
for giving me an opportunity to say something. I didn't write it down because when I saw your question, I was like, this is who I am. I think I can just speak from the heart who I am and where do I come from. My story is almost similar to Matthew. I'm from KwaZulu-Natal, and I'm the firstborn of 10 siblings. And the way in which I grew and was expected to do things was to take leadership. This was expected even from the knowledge point of view. So they expected that we must know it, we knows it, we must figure it out. So that's the expectation that I had. And even when I went to school, even the teachers expected the same thing. If you understand that the rural places don't have resources, no library, and no laboratories, and we had to learn science from a geography teacher or from a history teacher, and we had to make the best out of it. And again, the expectation was there that she'll figure it out, she'll know it. So that's a kind of an upbringing that I had. And that made me to expand even in how I look at things, especially in the field of science, because I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to be a medical doctor. And then when I can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe there was a bit of a complaint. So that thing came. I grew up with that. I need to figure things out, no matter how difficult they can be. And when I grew up, there was this understanding that physics and physical sciences were difficult subjects, and girls cannot do it. But I thought that I will do it and I will make it simpler for others. And I had to prove that it can be done, even when people have said it cannot be done. So that came along with me, that I need to figure things out. And the surroundings where I grew up with my father, he was building houses, he was fixing cars. So I was working with him all the time as a first child, and he expected me to help him. So when he built houses, and I was asking, why are you digging the foundation this deep? Why are you putting what you're putting? And there, the explanations that were scientific, that as I look at it now, they were being embedded in me. When he fixes the cars, he would explain why is the engine works the way it does. And when he takes out the engine from the car, he would use the pulleys. And I would ask the question, why are you pulling the rope the way you're doing? And I didn't understand that was already a physics concept that were being taught by him, not knowing that he was teaching me that. So when I got to the university, I got to add everything up. And then I told myself, I will try to make this simpler even for those whom I'll be grooming as a teacher, as a lecturer, when I found myself in a class with the students in front of me. So my philosophy is linked more to the background that I had, that even when they have said physics is difficult, I must find ways of making it easy, relating it to where they come from. So each time I will teach, I'll go back to where the students are coming from. Whether they come from the rural places, I could relate to that. When they're in an urban area, I could also relate to that because the university was there. So the philosophy is built by experience, from where I come from, who I am, from where my dad would give me that knowledge without him knowing, but I managed to make sense of it. And my environment also taught me that there is science everywhere. So that became a beautiful learning experience from my upbringing to where I am, including my university experience and training and all of that. Yeah, that's what I want to share. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Bowie. And for me, both Matthew and Bowie have shared really interesting, and they interesting accounts of where their passion for their disciplines actually came from, and those are such useful hooks, because for me now I can't wait to see how this actually influences the way in which they teach. So how do you actually draw on students' prior understanding of physics, for example, in your lectures? How do you know what students actually bring into, what knowledge students bring into the learning context? So and build on that in order to make physics accessible to students. I mean, I love the idea of challenging particular notions, and we talked about that in the idea of story. Challenging particular notions of who's good at physics, and the idea that physics is hard. So I love that. So it's actually, so thank you very much for sharing this. Okay. And then we can build on this. So you started talking about what you teach. You started talking about whether it was animal ecology or whether it's physics. You start in that story, in that initial story, you start talking about your discipline. But then now you're going to build on that and say, well, this is what I teach and this is how I teach it. Okay, so I've asked you to do that. Does anybody want to just share a couple of sentences with us on that? So what do you do in your classroom? What do your students do? So, how do I get my students to be excited as I am? What you do at the outset, you actually show us that passion and that excitement. How do you convey that to your students? I did see a hand, Ranjini.
Thank you. I just wrote a very small paragraph, but yeah, I'll just read what I did, right? I'm a teacher who is highly passionate about her subject, which is human resource management. I see my vocation as an opportunity to develop great HR practitioners who would then go into the world and do justice to the HR profession and to the employees and organizations that they serve. So as much as I may not do it myself, as much as I would have imagined, I work through them. Yeah, so that's what I wrote. Thank you.
Oh, great. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And then you can see those sentences as you go through it, as you look at it, you actually can build on that quite very, very effectively, both in your philosophy, and then you can actually look at concrete examples of that in your when you talk about your practice. Lunetta?
Yes. You can see that there are various and varied experiences in how we became what we are as a people. And my question is, how do you then validate that? How do you evaluate that? Because we all have different perspectives of what influenced us, why we are what we are today, and what we feel is appropriate for our own students and so on. So I rather find it really difficult to sit down and probably give a comment on one's teaching philosophy, because we all have different perspectives. And as soon as they begin to put in a judgment, then I'm saying they should be weighing towards my philosophy, which I don't think is correct. Would you be able to, can you say something about that?
I can. Well, I mean, let me just say that what I'm doing is I'm going through this in a very linear and very sequential way, because I can't think of, I mean, it was the way I structured this particular workshop. But we don't just look at the philosophy in isolation. So we don't just look at these beliefs and we look at it a lot more holistically. So, and as I started saying, what I want to see now is, even though these starting points are so different, the philosophies, what we want to see is that connection that you start making between teaching maths to school teachers, and how those values actually become evident in your practice, and also to what extent what we do see, I mean, this is a scholarly project, and I'll come back to that, is also the connections that you're going to start making between your own values and also what we know in the literature to be principles or theories of teaching and learning. So it's those kinds of links. So and often what we want to see is when you start talking about the importance of experience and providing students with authentic experiences in the field, what we want to begin to see is okay, right, that's very interesting, and that's how you as a student learned, and you see the value of that, and you decided, okay, right, now part of the way in which I want to teach is to provide students with that kind of experience. And when you do that, you're actually going to now show us how you do that. And when we see these connections, so we don't look at it in isolation, irrespective, I mean, people talk about, I may not subscribe to being a positivist, but we get portfolios where people talk about being positivist, because their discipline requires that of them. And that's fine. But it's how you actually enact that, and how how that informs your actual practice, and the kinds of activities that you actually develop for students to learn in a particular way. That becomes the important thing. So the experience is looked at a lot more holistically. Have I addressed you, Lynetta?
Yes, I think you have. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll carry on, and then we'll some of it you maybe get greater clarity. I see another hand. Opa.
Good morning to you, ma'am. We are speaking to Julian Tombeni, the head of Department of Biomedical Sciences at UJ.
Good morning.
I sent an email to the doctor, and he has responded to me, but I'm just following up with the call just to make sure that I am communicating with the correct doctor. Could you confirm his email address for me, please?
Julian, I think you are having a different conversation, and your mic is on.
Definitely the correct one. You have just confirmed it with me. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, ma'am. Bye. No, it's correct.
Opa, Julian, please can you mute your mic?
Yes.
Good morning, colleagues.
Nice to and has successfully.
Sorry. Hi, Kibbie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Opa. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
Sorry about that. You asked what I teach. I teach chemistry, and how I teach it. Very interesting story that I want to tell you. You might actually find this a bit funny. I've taught chemistry for a number of years, for a long time actually, and I was very proud with proud of my thing, because I always thought that I was a good lecturer. And my daughter then grew up, and she was in high school, and she came to me. She was doing chemistry, and she wanted me to explain something that I thought I could do in my sleep, which was molecular geometry. So I said, oh, you mean that? And then I explained it to her, and then she walked out of my room, and she went to my sister, and then she says, oh my goodness, I don't know how a student's pass. She can't teach. So then my sister comes back to me and she told me that she was laughing. And that actually made me think about the way I teach. That was coming from my child. And then I went back. What I was trying to explain to her was a concept that students in chemistry actually find very, very abstract. It's molecular geometry. What is the structure of this? So I was just saying, oh, this molecule is like this. And she said she was moving her hands around and whatever. And she went on talking and talking and talking for a long time. She seemed like she knew what she was talking about, but goodness gracious me, I don't know what she was talking about. That's when I went to models. I started using models to actually, so that students can actually have a visual image of what I'm talking about instead of trying to describe it in words. Mm-hmm. And the difference, you cannot, it was like day and night. So when it comes to that, I'm going to carrying a big class, and then I'm saying, this is what happens. You remove that lone pair of electrons. This is how it's changing. The students that we're teaching today are very visual, and also 3D thinking, visualizing things in 3D is something that I took for granted. Not everybody can do it, but when they are sitting there and they've got a model in front of them, they are holding it in their hands and they can turn it around, they can actually see it, they can move it around. It made a difference. And it has actually become one of the easiest chapters for my students. And that came from my criticism that came from my daughter. So how do I teach? I teach, if I can just quickly, let me go to this. How do I teach this? What do I say? I want my students to participate. I don't want them to, I don't want my lectures to become a monologue. Okay. I want them to talk back to me, because in talking back to me, I can tell whether they understand what I'm trying to put across or not. Yeah. Yeah. I give my students a chance to also sit in their own little groups, because and talk amongst themselves, because no matter how approachable I think I am to my students, there's always that little soul that I feel will never raise up their hand and feel comfortable to talk to me as a lecturer, but is happy to talk to their peers, and they can correct each other within the groups. So I let them talk among themselves. And then maybe one person in the group can then come back and give the feedback, and 4 or 5 groups. Okay, now this is, you're going to do this little exercise, and then somebody gives me a feedback. They're okay talking to their peers, but they're not really okay talking to me. So I integrate different methods of teaching. They, talk to each other, talk to me as well. So I don't know if this is just a summary that I'm giving you. That kind of like captures it. Yes, yeah.
And thanks for that, Orpa. It actually gives us a good idea of how you link. And I mean, I think that I just want to take a step back. I mean, a lot of those our teaching is built when we actually get criticism, and I think that's why the feedback continues to be so important. Becoming a better teacher, or becoming of our discipline, often happens because we've actually made mistakes. So the point I always make when I talk about teaching evaluations is that don't be afraid to actually include the negative feedback that you get. But what's more important is, how do you respond, or how does that help you become a better teacher, or how does that help you improve your practice? So the idea that molecular chemistry is actually a discipline that needs to be taught using visual aids is really important. So there's a strong link between the practice of using visual aids and the reason, the why, answering the why question. Why do I teach in this way? You know, and sometimes that comes from your philosophy, from your experience, and from, importantly, the nature of the discipline that you're actually teaching. So that also becomes quite important. So thanks for sharing, everybody. So your teaching philosophy then is a narrative description of your own conception of teaching. It includes a rationale. So in saying why you're using models, or why you actually, so you're not just saying you use group work, you're actually providing a strong rationale for why group work is useful in your particular context, okay? And that may link to your view that learning happens through active engagement and participation, and the group work allows for the participation that's quite important. So that rationale of why you do what you do. It's a place to voice holistic views of the teaching process, okay? So, you know, so you're drawing in your discipline, your knowledge, your whole, you're not just seeing it in little compartments, but it's a holistic view of the teaching process. And that includes your thoughts about the definitions that you use, their interactions in the teaching and learning context, your own views about who your students are, okay, where they come from, what knowledge and skills they bring into the context. How can we enhance that? How can we draw on the knowledge and skills? And also, what are some of the constraints in terms of identifying what the knowledge and skill students come to the teaching and learning context with? What kind of, also these are integrally linked to your goals, your own teaching goals, okay? And your teaching goals may be also to instill passion for the discipline in your students, or for students to become professionals, you know, excellent professionals, become critical citizens, to engage in society more broadly. It depends on what your goals are. And this is what is contained in your teaching philosophy, okay? And your teaching philosophy, and this actually provides the framework for everything else that follows in terms of what your practice is. Okay, so you've seen this before, and it's really, this kind of summarizes the whole teaching portfolio, okay? So Lemson actually talks about the goals and values of education as being really important. So your philosophy is informed by your own ideas about the goals and values of education, your beliefs about teaching and learning, the theories that inform that. I'm going to talk to that just now. This is what I do to foster learning. Okay, this is my practice. But also importantly, this is what my students do to learn. These students also are not passive in this teaching and learning process. Okay, they actively, what do students do? How do they demonstrate that they have learned? Okay, and that would link also to your assessment. Importantly, teaching and learning always happens in a context. Okay, it happens in a climate, in a particular climate, okay? How do you ensure, and the broader context now, if you think about it, the COVID context, the working online, the mediation in terms of the way in which we use technology, this is the current context. But how do I actually use this context to ensure that students learn, and that the way in which they learn is aligned with my beliefs about good teaching and learning? Okay, and some of us had real challenges, you know, because we believed that teaching and learning actually happens in a face-to-face context, and that required a major shift in terms of, okay, how do we now ensure that the kinds of engagements that we have is equally rich but different in the online space? So that kind of reflective process, as in terms of how context helps us change our teaching and learning, becomes quite important. Okay, You can, I'm going to give you a few minutes to write something down as well. Let's write a little bit more, maybe 5 minutes. Write down 1 or 2 sentences on what do you think your goal or purpose of higher education is or should be, and what values might underpin this goal or purpose. Okay, I'm going to just let you get to do some work on for a bit. I'm going to just grab a glass, refill my water bottle in the meantime, but 5 minutes, 2 minutes to do this, not 5, 5 maybe too long. I'm not going to get to 2 minutes. Just 1 or 2 sentences on each of these 2 prompts. Okay, how are you doing? Do you want a bit more time, or can we share? Ishmael? Hello, Ishmael. Do you want to contribute?
No. I just joined now.
Oh, okay. Okay. Anybody want to share? No? Come, I'm looking for a volunteer. Matthew, thank you.
You didn't give us very long, but I've done the first one. I'll get to the second one next. So the goal or purpose of higher education, well, one idea from my side is, something I've noticed, a theme with my students, well, with my own experience actually also, is just teaching people how to think. So knowledge accumulation is a subject-specific endeavor, but teaching somebody how to think and how to be critical and, how to question things is a universal skill that is with them for the rest of their life. So I do think sometimes that is the difference between what we should be achieving sort of secondary education versus tertiary education. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I like the idea of teaching people how to think. I'll come back to that just now. I see other hands, but I don't know who it is. Let me just.
Hello, can I speak?
Hello. Yes, please.
Thank you so much for the presentation. So what I think should be the goal of the higher education is that they should have strategic goals that they want to achieve generally, and also specifically even to individual disciplines, because what may apply in humanities broadly may not apply in the sciences nor in the engineering and so on. So the higher education, you have that goal that, okay, broadly, that we want to produce graduates that will fit into the type of jobs that this generation needs, the type of job that the level of technological advancement that is in the world needs, because the need in every facet of discipline is changing. So therefore, there should be revisitation of curricula across disciplines, perhaps every 5 years, because things are changing. All of us in the research space knows that things are changing every day. Something was fine yesterday, it's already old-fashioned today. So the curriculum, some of the curriculums, they've been what people have been learning for years. So there's need for curriculum change. Recently, we conducted a survey in our department with our alumni. And from the survey, we saw that a lot of them were saying that there are certain things that we need to include in the curriculum, that it should not wait for them to find out when they want to come for masters or doctorates, because most of those things we push it into research, because we believe they are the new development now. So if anybody is coming into research, it should think of all these new areas. So I think the Department of Education should have that goal of seeing that we are producing market-ready, generation-ready graduates, and those value should be able to reflect in the way the plan accreditation, finance universities, and so on. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Thank you for sharing. And I think that that's important, especially if you are in a field like engineering, producing students, and it's important to students to get jobs. So producing or developing students who are able to make a contribution in the market or in industry is really important. And that speaks to what you were saying, and you would link that to how you develop your curriculum that is informed by what is actually happening in the world of work and the changes in the world of work. So there will be that connection, but it starts with this view that you want to produce students who will actually make a valuable contribution in industry and will be market ready, as you say. Sue?
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. Can you hear me? Because
yes, we can.
Okay, because I've switched my headset and sometimes this one's not so great. So I teach social work, and I believe that the goal of higher education in my field now is to raise the consciousness of young adults to the world around them, to develop critical thinkers who are equipped and empowered to facilitate change in society when they graduate, and also to instill a love of learning that manifests itself in increased numbers of social work students coming back to postgraduate studies. I'm particularly interested in the field of green social work, because I believe this is a topic of, it's actually a social justice issue. And so raising consciousness of young adults to the world around them would go bigger than the structural issues that we face in South Africa, poverty and lack of access to resources and those kinds of things. But bigger is not bigger, because they're huge, but broader issues of climate change and how that impacts on the poorest of the poor. So there's my 6 years for what it's worth.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for sharing that. I was struggling to hear because your mic was a bit muffled, but I think I got the gist of it. It was you were talking about the importance of raising consciousness among students, and so that they actually also can address social issues and social concerns like social injustices and climate change and other broader social issues. And I think that's an important goal. And I think, again, that goal will inform the way in which you approach and you develop your curriculum, but also the kinds of activities that you would require students to do during the course of your modules. So those are important goals, and they're very different, and they are different. So you're not just producing students who will be good social workers, but you're actually going beyond that. And that's that also will speak to the way in which you teach and the way in which you approach your curriculum development and your pedagogy. Just one more, Mohammed, and then we'll move on.
Hi, Kibbie. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. And I think the definitions of the goal or the purpose of higher education can be viewed from different angles. Mm-hmm. Each one of us, from his own respective speciality, see it from a different angle. But for me, I always thought of it. Is higher education is a progression of knowledge, and progression of knowledge can be created. New knowledge can be created. Older knowledge can be shaped, can be redirected, repurposed for whatever need, the need of the society, the need of the world around us. Whether it can be work, it can be, as you mentioned, social issues, it can be legislation, can be many things, not only about jobs, because we never have graduates ready to take the jobs. It's been given the tools and given basic fundamentals, just like you're going to get a driving license. When you get a driving license, doesn't mean you are a good driver. You can drive legally. So the same thing here, knowledge can be only as a startup to shape the person and to respond to the need. As I said, what are the values to underpin that, and what we want to do it in a purpose that's with morality, with ethical values, with responsibility. Now we've got a new responsibility. The old teaching was only about society, about only responsibility towards society and the government. Now we've got a new responsibility towards the environment. The new knowledge has been shaping, and climate change. So we have to redirect and repurpose our education system to go more into sustainable education. So this is one colleague spoke earlier about teaching students to think, not only to think critically as well. So that's part of the things I like to do and I like to contribute in higher education. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and thank you for sharing. And I think you're absolutely right. And you know that part of what we want to do in higher education is about having students to engage more broadly, to critique, to reflect, to change, and to be flexible, because the context continuously changes. And I think part of what I want to see is part of what we'd like to see in the portfolio is how do you actually do that in relation to your discipline, and so how do you teach students how to think? And I just want to share very quickly, one of the things you often do is you often think about thinking, and immediately your mind in this context goes to critical thinking. Somebody I may have shared this with some of you before. I've been reading the work of Elizabeth Minich, and she argues that what we need to be doing is not teaching students critical thinking, but teaching students how to think. And she makes a distinction. She says, because critical thinking really is that you're presented with an argument, or you're presented with knowledge or ideas, and you have to look at it and weigh it and critique it. But really what we don't do is ask people to take you through, or ask students to take you through a thinking process. How did they arrive at a particular response? And her argument is that doing that actually is a lot more, is a more socially just way of teaching. Because when you ask students to take you through their thinking process, gives you the opportunity of, as a lecturer, to learn about the students' values and goals. Right, so you're not just getting a response, and immediately you. So saying to a student, the rest of the class actually believes this, but you are there. Can you take us through how you arrived at this response or this solution to this problem? And by doing that, you're actually asking students to articulate how they good. I mean, how they think. And that's
hi everyone. I'm so sorry, guys. My got indicated I'm in meetings.
Okay, sorry, I just muted that. So it helps us actually, you know, so that actually helps us try to engage more with the students' thinking process, but helping them also articulate their responses and their thinking process. I think Lunetta asked, can knowledge be destroyed, abused, misinformed as a cognitive act? Lunetta, can you say a bit more about that?
Yes, after listening to what colleagues have said, I've come to think of now at higher education level, we're saying we're teaching students to think. I would like to know how that is being done, how one can be taught to think, because cognition is an informed act. You cogitate because you are reflecting on the environment and so on. And the environment therefore can also educate you or give you information that your own neurological reactions to the input is misinformed because of the information that you are getting. So I understand where the colleagues are coming from, but I also have reservations on teaching someone to think. That's where I'm coming from, because my own thinking might be misinformed and therefore end up misleading someone to think. But I can probably provide scenarios that can enable one to cogitate and begin to think about a particular construct.
I think you're beginning to answer your own question as you're speaking to it. So
yes, I guess.
Hey?
I guess so. That's why those I don't know colleagues that went to School of Critical Thinking in Frankfurt. These were the issues that were being we grappled with on what do we mean by critical thinking, and you know.
And I think that it's also, you know, and it's about raising an awareness and asking and using prompts to get students to reflect on their so it's that metacognitive level, you know, so take us through your thinking process, take us through how you got to that, and using scenarios to actually help, you know, to help students engage more critically with those processes. Those processes is actually quite, you know, is one way to do that. But you know, I stand corrected. I could, you know, there probably are multiple ways, and I'm looking forward to reading those. Matthew, is it in response to this?
Yeah, I just I agree with Mohammed's comment there in the text that it's not so much that my comment was taken from the scientific domain about teaching students to think. What I'm more specifically talking about is teaching critical thinking and the ability to criticize and actually question things. And it's not about getting a student telling them how they must think about the world. It's about getting them to question things. And I mean, that's fairly, in the scientific domain, we teach that, you know, it's not that complicated. You can, you can give an assignment where students must criticize a hypothesis, or they must give their interpretation of several hypotheses. And that's getting them to think about certain flaws and you know, advantages of different approaches in science, stuff like that. So yeah, just to add my comment there.
Yeah.
But my point is that they are already thinkers. You are not teaching them to think. All you are doing is providing them with scenarios that enables them to probably go look at a different at a particular scenario, but you are not teaching them to think. The only thing that does not think is something that is not a living entity. And a living entity thinks and goes beyond. So what you are providing is a scenario that you want them to think in a particular direction, solve a problem, or engage with a particular context. But you are not teaching them to think.
Or articulate how they solve a problem. So it's not just about, and I think that's the metacognitive level. So where you're actually asking of a student, not just how, not just to solve a problem and to give you a solution, but really to take us through their reasoning and their way of arriving at a particular problem. And I think that's what Elizabeth Minich was actually talking about when she said we need to teach explicitly, teach thinking. It's not that they don't think, but really to actually explore the metacognitive levels, you know, so to be able to ask students to articulate explicitly how they arrive.
Very true. In other words, we are enhancing what they are innate. We are all born with a thinking ability. So what we do, therefore, is to enhance that, but we are not teaching it. You are just enhancing it. It already exists.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is a lovely debate. I wish we could go on about it. I think we could spend the rest of the time going on.
I just want to reply to the colleague. There are so many students. They're talented, but you have to identify the talents and to take it out. To take it out by being critical with the student. Then the student can develop that. That's why today, in today's world, we're no longer talking about brainstorming, we're not talking about, we're talking about even design thinking labs. So the thinking as a philosophy I'm not a philosopher, I'm an engineer, but I did philosophy in high school some time ago. But it's very complicated things. And yes, I agree with you. Every living being can think, but sometimes there is a thinking procrastination. There is a thinking laziness. So you need to what you call provoke that critical thinking, provoke that in students for it to come out. That's what we do, and we need to provoke students for them to push them to be able to take out that energy and criticize. What do they see? What do they read about? What we teach them. The material, they must not be receptive. I tell students, cannot be receptive whatever some student can. I tell them, every Tom, Dick, and Harry can go and prepare something, come dump it on you. No, you have to be an ability to criticize and not wait until the evaluation is done and speak bad about the lecturer. Being able to engage in the classroom with the lecturer. I said, sir, ma'am, I don't understand this. This cannot be. I read in the book. Go beyond what the lecturer give you in class. This is what you're talking about, my colleague. We're not talking about telling them how to think. We're telling them to provoke the thinking in them.
Yeah. And well, thanks for that, Mohammed. I think, and I think that the more we do it, so it is, but I think I want to go back to and link this back to philosophies, because it does speak to, and there are many things that come out that, you know, in this whole discussion on critical thinking, and many of you will write in your philosophy statement that you see your role as developing critical thinkers or something along those lines. I think importantly is that you unpack that in ways that we have been doing in the session now. You know, so thinking about what does critical thinking mean in relation to your discipline? Now, Matthew gave you particular examples of what that means in relation to his discipline. So you need to unpack that. And what opportunities do you provide students to actually explain and discuss notions of thinking? Because very often we forget the metacognitive level. We forget to ask students to explain their responses. We forget to ask students to tell us how they actually arrived at particular solutions, to compare different arguments and to tell us why one particular argument is stronger in relation to their particular context. So it's making this connection. So when you talk about critical thinking and developing critical thinkers as being a goal as a in your philosophy, what you need to explore more fully is then what does that actually mean? In the next part of the portfolio, we want to see what does that actually mean in your practice, you know? So is it about actually developing students who can challenge a particular status quo, who work towards a more socially just profession? And then what examples? How do you actually do that? You know, and so these are important things. I've just put this up as an example that very often the ikigai are probably butchering this and saying it really wrongly, incorrectly. The Japanese concept of reason for being. So your reason for being is complex, and it is at the intersection of what you're good at, what you love, what the world needs and important. So a lot of this discussion was around what does the world need, and then of course what you're getting paid for. Okay, and that sweet spot is around what does that mean for me as a teacher in my discipline. So that's your reason for being a teacher of your discipline. We can get that, and very often it's not. It's like, you know, the concentric ring circles are not as evenly spread out, but that's what you kind of striving. I just put that up. But then if you think about what would our modules look like, if that's what's guiding you, what would our modules look like? Okay. And if we ask students to reflect on this intersection for their own, for themselves, what would that look like? Okay. And how do we prepare them for a more kind of rounded way of being in the world? Okay. Okay, so this is really summarizing many of the things we've covered. So it's, you know, your goals could be around contributing to accumulation of knowledge and skills in the knowledge community, inspiring responsible critical citizenship, contributing to skilled labor force, building socially, ecologically just and ethical learning communities, or communities more broadly, encouraging students to critically question privilege, oppression, domination, aimed at ending injustices, supporting the development of the whole student, changing the world. Okay, so these are some of the broad goals that, you know, that come up, and many of these have been discussed already. Okay, so now you need to think about, so, and I've already started saying that, now that we've actually said these are my goals, what you need to now think about is, what do you do as a teacher to foster this? Okay, so how do I build or develop critical citizens? How do I develop, and importantly, you're not going to just have one of these. In most instances, your goals will be a combination of these, and that's fine. Okay, we teach with multiple goals. Okay, so it could be a combination, but we do need to have a follow through, and to say, what do you as a teacher do to foster this? What should students do, and what do you expect from your students? Okay, so there needs to be that follow through and that link. And when we evaluate the portfolios, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that link and that connection. a learning context in which can you actually give us an example of what this looks like in practice in your discipline? Okay, give us that learning context. Write down, and so I'm looking at the time. Why don't you just maybe spend a few minutes just for yourself writing down a few sentences? And there's a lovely chat. There's an interesting chat going on. I mean, I think we're going to have to really have a session around critical thinking and unpacking that. Do people agree? Because I mean, this chat is just so interesting. Megan, we're going to have a masterclass on critical thinking. Okay, so let me give you 5 minutes or maybe 3 minutes to, thanks, Suzanne, a few minutes to just write down a few sentences so that, I mean, the whole goal of the session really is to also help you refine what you've written before. But if you go away with the skeleton of a philosophy, that will be awesome. Okay, so just write down a few sentences. We'll go on until 11:50. Is that all right? Okay. Who wants to share? Anybody, any volunteers to share? Lulama, do you want to share? Suzanne, how about you? Any volunteers to share? Ranjini, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. I'm just going to give it a shot. I don't think it's complete because I wanted to write a lot more, but I just wrote a couple of notes as you suggested. So I said, as the teacher, what do you do to foster this? I said, I give them various scenarios and I explain the theory, but I also provide real life examples and trigger them to respond to the scenarios and things like that. So that's kind of how I associate or I try to develop the skills that or the goals of higher education that I would like them to understand. Then from what should the students do or what do you expect from the students? Of course, engagement is what I expect from them in the classroom environment, but also the assignments and assessments that I offer are usually very application based. So they have to go and do a lot of research about organizations and specifically in my field within the HR space, about HR practices and then give critical insights about them. And then the learning context in which this is best fostered, I said that the context is very non-judgmental. So I always tell my students there is no one correct answer. And at the same time, I also try to challenge them and demand very high expectations of them, So yeah, I try to get that balance right of not being judgmental, but at the same time expecting great things from my students. So yeah, that's what I was able to write so far.
Thank you. That's a good start. So thank you for that. Just to remind everybody, Ranjini's goals she put in the chat was to learn more about something that interests you. So sparking interest is important, and to be value to the community around you. So developing that is also part of the strategy that she and these are the strategies that she would use to actually develop that or realize those goals. Anybody else want to share one more and then we can move on? There was another hand and it went down. Louis?
Thank you, Kibbie. I'll just maybe share briefly. So one of the values in my teaching and in general my teaching is inspired by the constitutional values, and one of those values are democratic ideals. So what I want to do is involve my students with deciding in the way they actually get taught. So my Friday lectures are usually quite flexible, and students then actually complete surveys where they vote on the way they want that lecture to be conducted. And it's then a mix of continuing with normal lectures, or we do practical examples. We have several debates. So like Ranjini said as well, you want to encourage students to give their opinions, and often they'll have vastly different ideas about what the answer is. And with the legal field lends itself quite well to that, because there isn't necessarily a correct answer. So I also want to see my students decide about the way in which they want to be taught.
Nice. I like that. It's very nice. And I think that, not all disciplines have that privilege or can do that. because some disciplines, they're not, some disciplines are structured in a very hierarchical way. So the nature of the knowledge in the discipline is very, very vertically structured. So you have to build on it, which does mean that there's less flexibility in terms of, what can be done. But there's always flexibility in terms of how, and how teaching happens. So giving your students a voice in relation to that is really useful and really a good strategy. And I think it's nice for students. I think students also like to feel that they're valued. And that's something, and their voices matter. And that as a result of making a comment, something's going to happen or somebody's going to respond. And that's important. So yes, it's a very good, it's a good strategy. Any other ideas? Should we move on? All right. Megan will send the recording. For those of you who've been asking, Megan will send the recording to you. Okay, so what I started saying is that it's really important to think about context. The teaching context is always really important. So, and I started talking about the importance of the disciplinary context. So it's your discipline, your profession, and that's really important. So, and that will really determine how you go about teaching and your approach as well. So strong, and also, I mean, you yourself as teachers have very strong disciplinary identities, and that is it. That comes through in your philosophy and in your portfolio. Disciplinary identities as well as professional identities, and I know that now we're actually working towards. And we're working in an environment where transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and even some people talk about anti-disciplinary. So, arguing that actually working within the confines of a discipline limits problem solving and limits people's ability to think creatively. So, and I know there's a lot of that, but I think that the discipline still plays an important role in our teaching and in the way in which we approach our teaching. So that context will definitely inform your philosophy. Also your identity. So it's not just your discipline, but it's your identity more broadly. Who am I as a teacher? But also what other identities or senses of self or positionalities do I actually occupy that will inform my teaching? So to what extent being a mother, being a child, being a daughter, being a lecturer, being an academic developer, to what extent do all of these actually inform the way in which I teach? Also, who are my students, importantly? And how do I account for, accommodate their own lived realities in my teaching? Okay, and what opportunities do I actually put in place to ensure that I know that? And that's hard. I mean, none of this is easy, and I think that grappling with these is and showing that these are things that you're really grappling with, that you're challenging, is also important in your because it's not a neat and polished piece of work. It's a very reflexive piece of work. So, argue and pointing out that, these are things that you're really grappling with in this current context. How do you come to know who your students are, especially if you have, if you're teaching a class of 350 students? Also, importantly, every context, there's power relations. And so who am I in relation to my students, in relation to my field, my discipline, in relation to my institution? And how do those power relations influence my teaching practice? So sometimes rules and regulations are imposed on us that limit our own creativity. One of the challenges academic staff often write about is the rules and regulations around assessment practices, and how these limit what could be possible in terms of how we assess students, the number of assessment tasks that we give students. So just thinking through and acknowledging that that may be something that informs you. In the UJ context, there's a number of different influences as well. So UJ has a learning to be philosophy. Many departments are required to report on transformation, to report on decolonization, to report on 4IR. So how does that enable, or if in some instances even constrain the way in which you engage, you teach, and your classroom practices? Okay, so just thinking through these, and you don't have to, please remember, you don't have to write about everything. You select and think about what is most pressing, in terms of my own context, what are the strongest influences at this point in time, okay, or over a period of time. Okay, right, so one of the things we do have to, and Lemson actually says that when we're thinking about our philosophy, we have to ask, where do our views about learning come from? And have they been well considered? And how do they link, or have they been tested? And how does that link to the knowledge around teaching and learning? Okay, in relation to, and I would always argue that you don't necessarily have to start with general literature on teaching and learning. You might find literature on teaching and learning in relation to your discipline more accessible. So there'll be teaching and learning journals, in the humanities, in sociology, in finance, So think about it in relation in either in your own discipline or in similar disciplines, and start there if you feel more comfortable. But what's important, especially if you're going for promotion to full professor or associate professor, is we want to see some kind of growth and development and some kind of linking of your own teaching and your teaching practice and your teaching beliefs to the theories of teaching and learning. Okay, so drawing on theories of teaching and learning is quite important as well. Okay, so how do I think about my teaching in relation to these giants in the field as well? But also, you may want to critique that, so the scholarship of teaching and learning is also something you want to engage in. So researching your own teaching practice, but contributing to the scholarly development of teaching and learning in relation to your own disciplines. Okay, and you need to also remember that your teaching portfolio is a scholarly piece of work. So you do need to make sure that academic conventions are adhered to. So you will have referencing. Okay, so you do need to reference the texts that you use, and all other, so you, and the way in which you do that could be linked to your own discipline practices as well. Your theories that you draw on will actually help you provide a good solid argument or justification for your own philosophy and your own practices as well. So it actually gives it more traction. And we don't want you to regurgitate the theory. So what the theory does is it shows where you are located in relation to teaching and learning theories, or theoretically where you draw your inspiration from. Okay, so you may say you draw your inspiration from experience, experiential learning. So then you want to think, okay, who's written about experiential learning? Kolb's work and the comes to mind. So you want to link it to theories of of teaching and learning as well. But also don't, this is not a theoretical piece of work. It's informed by theory, but what we want to see is its application in practice. So don't over-rely on theory. Okay, so over-reliance on theory is also problematic, because we do want to see your own practice, your own voice coming to the fore. That's important. Your own voice must not be muted. Okay. Excuse me a second. Having a bit of a coughing fit there. Sorry about that. So in terms of your learning context, you may want to start off by looking at what is your understanding of learning. Okay, in your discipline, what does learning look like? Okay, so different disciplines have different conventions. Okay, so some people may want to talk about you know, their work in practical contexts. You know, so that's quite an important aspect. So what does learning actually look like, and what kind of practicals do you actually provide students, activities do you provide students with? So that's but it'll be very dependent on what you're teaching. You know, your discipline may be you know, maybe revolve around case histories. Okay, so how do you help students learn using case histories? Or case studies, or cases in law, whatever. Don't forget to talk about specific teaching activities and learning tasks. Give us examples, not too many. Choose the best ones that demonstrate how you teach. So if there's an activity that you have around students actually doing a particular practical, or students solving a particular problem, choose the best one to show. Okay, and what is the climate that you facilitate? So somebody earlier talked about using peers, okay, providing opportunities to break students out into breakout groups, and having discussions amongst themselves, and then reporting back. So that kind of climate, that creates a climate of enabling students to engage, even those that may be afraid and not as confident to engage. But engagement in learning is important to you, and having students, making sure that students have their voices heard is important. One way to do that is to provide peer groups that students work in. Okay, have you drawn from theory? Okay, but also talk about your own future developments and future opportunities. So where are you going with this as well? Okay, and I think that one of the things that we've been seeing in many of the portfolios recently is a discussion around working in an uncertain teaching and learning environment, and how not only do we have to are we working in uncertainty, we have to prepare students to work in uncertain situations as well. So how does that help? You know, so how do you actually help students become professionals, whether it's engineers, whether it's HR managers, teachers? How do you actually help them become professionals or in that uncertain context, to work and function in uncertainty? And part of it is, how do we model that for our students? Okay, model working in uncertain times. Well, what kind of fluidity and flexibility do you now build into your modules as a result of uncertainty? Okay, these are just some of the literature that we've been drawing on in terms of thinking about the importance of social justice, and how that's actually informed our own pedagogical practices. Okay, but you will have your own that you would draw. Many staff have been drawing on the work of Paulo Freire. Dewey often features in teaching philosophies, Vygotsky in terms of constructivism, and various others. Okay. Okay. So what I'm not going to do this activity. I'm just going to move on, if it's okay with you. But really what you now need to, you can use this prompt to really think about, what is my context, okay? What are some of the issues that I as a teacher need to actually address in my own teaching practice? What are some of the challenges, and how have these actually informed the way in which I teach? Have there been, what constraints and enablements have there, are there in relation to my own teaching practice? So both in terms of departmental constraints and enablements, the university, as well as broader societal. I mean, we all have to ensure that what we teach in our modules are aligned to the programs that our modules are part of. So that's part, and these are registered with SAQA. So does that actually limit your flexibility as well? Okay. Okay, so teaching is a scholarly project. I've always, and I can't emphasize that enough. And teaching for portfolios. But it's also a process document, and that's what I want to talk about. So it's something that develops as you develop as a teacher. So it really is a living, your teaching portfolio is a living document that documents your process of becoming a teacher in your discipline. Okay. Okay, you're also building, you've seen these slides before, you're building an argument for your development as a teacher, and you're building an argument for the quality of your teaching. So this means you have to provide evidence. So in the evidence that we're talking about is really the examples of your practice, your responses from your students, your responses from your external examiners on the kinds of things that you've done, a range of your assessment tasks. Okay. But also remember, I mean, I think these prompts, somebody said earlier on that they were writing and they realized that they wrote a lot more than they thought they would. And that often happens when you're writing. You would write a draft and then you would just find yourself the ideas flowing, and you would write a lot more. But I think in a teaching portfolio, you do need to be quite selective as well. We do limit the page numbers. So it's 50 pages with appendices. The only thing we make allowances for is the teaching evaluations, because we know that can go into quite a few pages because of the qualitative comments. So you do need to be quite selective. So in terms of your own philosophy and providing examples of your philosophy, be quite selective. Okay. And make sure that whatever you've included in the appendices as examples or in the hyperlinks that you've provided have been extensively discussed well in the actual portfolio. Okay, and when we talk about current, we generally talk about the last 5 years, but if there's something or an activity that's illustrative that you've done a while ago, you're welcome to bring that in. The general rule of thumb is in the last 5 years. For teaching evaluations, we won for the last 3 years. Okay, evaluations for the last 3 years. And when I talk about valid, authentic, frank, and open, be open and honest about things that worked, but also things that didn't work and how you will change them in the future. So that reflexivity is quite important. Okay, these are important things that we forget to put into. Okay, let me pause there and say, you can be quite creative in your philosophy. You can use poetry, you can use picture in your portfolio. Please do use poetry if you want to. Use pictures. These actually give us good insights into who you are. Okay, and some disciplines lend themselves to it, others don't, but that's fine. It also needs to be a reflection of who you are. We've seen amazing portfolios where staff have included music to demonstrate particular points they made about what influences them as a teacher, and provided us links to the music. So that's great. So do that. Be as creative as you can, but also make sure that the way in which your portfolio is presented is actually readable. It helps, and there are guides for us, because remember, we're not experts in your discipline. Neither are we experts. Neither do we know you personally. Well, not everybody would know you personally in the committee. We do have input from the faculty, so that provides us with the faculty view as well. So that's important. But you need to ensure that somebody from the outside understands what you're trying to explain or a particular context. So it needs to be readable, and it needs to be readable by people that are outside of your discipline. What we find, and this is something that I've looked at so many portfolios now, but one of the things that really stands out for me is that those portfolios that are really good, we see a strong link between people's research interests and their teaching practice. And there's often that research is where people's passions lie, that particular, and in their teaching of those areas, you see the ways in which they actually engage students in really innovative and exciting ways. So that link between research and teaching is quite important, but not all disciplines, and not, sometimes we teach modules that are not directly linked to our research interests, and that's also fine. So the idea that the portfolio is dynamic and it's a living, and it's a living document, it constantly changes. And I said, remember the needs of your reader. Okay. Are there any questions? Questions, comments, anything that you want to share or get some clarity on? Now's your chance. I see a hand. I don't know who it is. Can you just go ahead? Just unmute your mic and go ahead.
Hello, Kibbie. It's
yes,
Abby.
Abby. Hi.
Yeah,
Hi, Abby.
Abby.
Hi, Abby. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for the very insightful presentation. I attended the first session as well. I'm trying to also prepare my teaching portfolio. I just want to, because this session is on actually developing the teaching philosophy I hear. But when I looked through other colleagues, their teaching portfolios, I find that those first initial questions of who and what you are is usually like the introduction of the whole teaching portfolio. I'm referring specifically now to the teaching portfolio. And then there's just a session for a small section just talking about the philosophy. Then all that's about talking about what you teach and all that is also another section 3 or 4 something. So I was just trying to find out, because do I put all that, all the stories, the background in the teaching philosophy, or I separate them into those various sections? Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody want to respond to that? Kapil?
Oh, hello, Kibbie. Oh, no, I had my own question.
I'm asking you to respond to that, then to ask your question.
I'm not sure.
Put you on the spot.
It, as long as you can tell, you can put it in different sections or in one section, but as long as the story is coherent, that it links up to show what it goes to your philosophy. So I would say there's no right or wrong, but it's how it's presented.
Okay, thank you for that. And I knew I could put you on the spot, so I did.
Well, I wasn't even expecting that, Kibbie.
I knew. Sorry about that. No, it's fine.
I don't know if it answered the question. I don't know if that's correct.
Yeah, no, okay, let me just answer the question. But Kapil is right. You know, so we do spend a lot of time answering these questions because these questions are just a guide. You're not going to answer every single question in your portfolio, in your philosophy, remember that. But these are just some of the things or some of the areas, some of the ideas that you could include in your philosophy. Now, your philosophy, even though you have a philosophy section, many times you can't just confine yourself to having everything in your philosophy in that philosophy section. A lot of your philosophy or the ideas around your philosophy, so the context, the ideas about context, the ideas about your discipline, actually also come through in your discipline. So these different sections are just a guide to tell you this is what you need to have in your philosophy, in your portfolio. But there are multiple, but your philosophy and the ideas that inform your teaching will go all the way through. But the main ideas will be something that you have at the beginning of your portfolio. Does that answer you, Abby?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. It does.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Kapil, you can ask your question now.
Okay. Thanks, Kibbie. No, thanks. Yeah. No, it's my same question. I think the same question I'm always struggling with every time I come to the workshop is like the self-plagiarism. As you said, you have the teaching of philosophy that you put from the first promotion, but for the next promotion, how do you still keep that without plagiarizing or submitting the same document? Even though, like, one of the examples would be like, I'm doing things like trying to publish in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning and trying to use the Teaching Innovation Fund. So yeah, I'm trying to do those two things, still using my original learning theory of connectivism in publishing those Scholarship of Teaching and Learning and Innovation. But it's been a couple of years since that original one. Not much has changed in terms of the learning theory, but there's other things I'm doing. But I don't want to delete things that was done well in the last one. But I want to add things, but then there's a page limit, but I also don't want to self-plagiarize. So that's still something I'm still struggling with.
Okay, so and I think that that's a valid concern. So Kapil, I think you also partially answered your question. So what you want to also emphasize, and I think that this is also one of the challenges whenever you're writing, you know, what do you keep in and what do you leave out? And I think, you know, just taking that step back and reflecting and saying, okay, right, I've always been, you know, connectivism has always been a theory that kind of fit well with my own philosophy, with my own practice as a teacher and my discipline. But really also, what have you built on that? So I would actually, you know, spend more time on thinking about how you've built on that, but also how you're now beginning to use that. You're using that in much more nuanced ways now. So rather previously, what you were saying is, this is what connectivism is, and this is how connectivism helps me as a teacher, okay? And informs my practice. Now, what you're doing is something slightly different. You're now engaging with connectivism in order to argue for particular positions. You now want to, it's not, so you now want to talk about how you're using connectivism in your own scholarly work, in your Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, and that could be the emphasis. Okay, so there will be some repetition. There will definitely be some repetition, you know, and that's understandable, you know. as Lynetta said, you can't plagiarize your own work. Lynetta, actually, people have been called to, and have actually been, there have been some cases around self-plagiarism as well. So but you want to avoid repeating too much what you've done. So what we want to see from your previous promotion was, how have you grown as a teacher? Your philosophy, the basis of your philosophy may not have changed much, but the way in which you're using your theories have not changed much, but the way in which you're using the theory has changed significantly. And I think that's the emphasis of this next promotion. The scholarship and the scholarliness. I hope I answered that.
Yeah, so just to link it more with the publications now, because I want to get the subtle publications before. So once to link how you used it in the subtle practice. Okay.
Yeah.
I think on the innovation fund. Okay, yeah.
So I think that's
at a bigger level. I just think at a deeper level than just saying I know about a theory, but how I'm applying the theory now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
And it's not just, so you're not just applying the theory to your own practice, but you're also applying it in terms of your scholarship as well.
Yeah, okay. Then I am on the right track. Okay. No, thanks.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions?
There's a hand from Kiruka.
Kiruka?
Kiruka. I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly.
Yes, you did. You tried.
How do you say it?
Thank you so much, Kibbie, for the. Even if you have to attend this several times, there's always a new edge, something new to learn. It's very insightful and quite engaging. The robustness of the engagement, it's the kind that we saying take it to the class and do the same. All right, thanks. My question is about it's about the evidence that you put in the portfolio. The evaluations, the assessment, is it fine if you extract for those evidence from different modules that you teach?
Yes.
Or do you have to stick to one module to make the story coherent?
No, you don't have to. And again, it will depend on what you're teaching and the point that you're trying to make. But you don't have, you don't have to stick to one module. You can draw from multiple modules. So you can say, in sociology 1B, I do X, Y, and Z, but I develop, so you can also get coherence by drawing on different, and because I'm teaching first years, I approach the task in this particular way. In sociology 3B, I've changed the tasks significantly so that it can, or I've changed the task slightly so that the cognitive demand is greater, so that because I expect more from my third year students, or I expect more complex answers from my third year students. So you can make connections and links, but illustrating from different modules is absolutely fine. And also remember, you need to also discuss your postgraduate teaching and your supervision. As well as your supervision. So especially when you're going for full professor, I think you need to spend a little bit more time on your postgraduate supervision and more space, give more space to your postgraduate supervision than you would for your undergraduate teaching. That's also another way to change things a bit. Okay, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Jenny?
Hi, sorry, I was trying to post in the chat because I've got a tree being cut down next door. So I'll go very quickly. Is there maybe a basic reading list that one can use as a platform to entry point for understanding the different philosophies and what's out there, just as I say, as a platform?
I don't have a basic reading list, but I can. If you send me an email, I'm happy to suggest readings that you can. There's a book called Reflexive Practice in Teaching and Learning, which is kind of quite nice in higher education. It's quite useful in terms of providing an overview of teaching and learning, but also gives you a sense of different kinds of theories and that you can draw on as well. So it's this book that I'm talking about, and the library has copies of these, or you can also, I think it's available online as well. So you can look at that. As a starting point, it's a very good introduction into teaching and learning in the higher education context. So I'm also going to, when I send the slides to you, I'm also going to send you a diagram. Let me just see if I can find it. Can you see this diagram? I don't expect you to read it, but it's quite complex. We use it when we're teaching the postgraduate diploma in higher education. And what this does is, on the outside of this, you have a number of different statements or principles around teaching and learning. So you start here and you think about, okay, which of these statements resonate with me? And as you go through, it links to particular approaches to teaching and learning, or theories to teaching and learning, okay? And then you, in the red, along the red is key thinkers that are that's linked to these different theories, okay? I'll send it to you so you can think about your own practice in relation to this. And it's quite, and then we've got like some disciplines that are linked to this. This is quite a useful, if you're not clear about where you want to locate yourself, you can actually use these statements to locate yourself within this learning theory diagram. Okay, so I'll send that to you, and then you can, then it's easy to find references in relation to these. But if you need more, just give me a shout and say, I'm thinking about this. Do you have references that you can suggest? Quite happy to do that.
That's great. Thanks very much.
Okay. Anybody else? We've got 2 minutes. Any other questions? Okay, so I would, what's quite useful, although many people feel that the teaching portfolio is a very personal document, what's useful is to actually get a critical friend or somebody, a colleague, to read through and give you suggestions. Maybe even somebody that's been through the process before. That's just to get that sense of, okay, how does mine, is there feedback that you can give me? Are there ways in which I can improve? Are there things that are not clear? That's quite important, so I think it's important to do some reading and to start doing some reading so that you locate yourself. So these prompts will help you develop a kind of skeleton, and then you need to flesh that out and build that up with some reading and some reflection on the reading and in relation to your own practice. Okay. There's been such a nice, robust discussion in the chat. So unfortunately, we don't have time to go through all of those. But thank you, everybody. Thank you very much for your time, for listening to me and sticking with me. I hope this has been helpful. And yeah, drop me an email if you need some references or ideas. I'll actually send some critical readings through to Megan as well. Yeah, thank you, everybody. And
thank you, Kibbie. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kibbie.